Start the select board agenda with the consent agenda, starting with the town accountant's warrants, moving into gift acceptances, and the minutes. Do we have a gift acceptance? I don't.
No, there's.
See one, okay. Minutes of February 5th, February 26th, and March 5th. And then the one-day special licenses for Friends for Tomorrow on May 5th from 4 p.m. to 10 p.m., 246 Old Road to 9 Acre Corner, all alcohol. Concord Orchestra on May 18th and May 19th from 7 to 11 p.m. at 51 Walden Street, wine and malt beverages. Concord Orchestra again on the 20th of May from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. at 51 Walden Street, wine and malt beverages. And the Concord Museum on the 14th of April from 7 p.m. to 12 a.m. at 91 Everett Street, all alcohol. 51 Walden Inc. on 421 from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. at 54 Walden Street, wine, and that's interesting, the 51 Walden is having it at 54 Walden Street, wine and malt beverages. And then Emerson Umbrella on May 5th from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. at 200 Strawberry Hill Road, all alcohol. And we have a number of proclamations this week. Maybe he should. He's very good at that.
I don't want the bad emails coming my way.
Okay, well, would you like to read the National Library Week proclamation for 2018?
I would be honored to do so.
And I believe it's
I signed it. All right. Whereas libraries are not just about what they have for people, but what they do for and with people. Whereas libraries have long served as trusted and treasured institutions, and library workers and librarians fuel efforts to better their communities, campuses, and schools. Whereas librarians are leaders in their institutions and organizations, in their communities, in the nation, and in the world. Whereas librarians continue to lead the way in leveling the playing field for all who seek information and access to technologies. And whereas libraries and librarians look beyond their traditional roles and provide transformative opportunities for education, employment, entrepreneurship, empowerment, and engagement, as well as new services that connect closely with patrons' needs. Whereas libraries and librarians lead their communities in innovation, providing STEAM programming, maker spaces, and access and training for new technologies. Whereas libraries are pioneers supporting democracy and affecting social change with a commitment to providing equitable access to information for all library users regardless of race, ethnicity, creed, ability, sexual orientation, gender identity, or socioeconomic status. Whereas libraries lead in working with diverse communities, including people of color, immigrants, and people with disabilities, offering services and educational resources that transform communities, open minds, and promote inclusion and diversity. Whereas librarians, library workers, and supporters across America are celebrating National Library Week. Now therefore be it resolved that we, the Concord Select Board, proclaim National Library Week April 8th through 14th, 2018. We encourage all residents to visit the Concord Free Public Library this week and explore what's new at your library and engage with your librarian. Because of you and our library leaders, libraries transform.
Hear, hear. Great. Thank you. And we also have a proclamation, the Holocaust Remembrance. Is there somebody else that wants to read this, or I'll be happy to? Okay. Thank you. Days of Remembrance for the Victims of the Holocaust. Whereas the Holocaust was the state-sponsored, systematic persecution and annihilation of European Jewry, getting that wrong, by Nazi Germany and its collaborators. Between 1933 and 1945, 6 million were murdered. Romana, Gypsies, people with disabilities, and Poles were also targeted for destruction or dissemination for racial ethnic, or national reasons, and millions more, including homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, Soviet prisoners of war, and political dissidents, also suffered grievous oppression and death under Nazi tyranny. And whereas the history of the Holocaust offers an opportunity to reflect on the moral responsibilities of individuals, societies, and governments. And whereas we, the people of Concord, should always remember the terrible events of the Holocaust, the genocides in Armenia, Cambodia, Bosnia, Rwanda, and Darfur. We all have a duty to use these memories as a catalyst to rid us of racial hatred, intolerance, tyranny, and discrimination. And whereas we, the people of the town of Concord, should actively rededicate ourselves to the principles of individual freedom in a just society. And whereas April 11th, 2018 has been designated pursuant to an act of Congress and internationally as a day of remembrance for the victims of the Nazi Holocaust, known as Yom Shoah, I may have gotten that wrong. And whereas it is appropriate for the people of Concord to join the international commemoration, now therefore, we as the Concord Select Board call for a memorial service for the victims of the Holocaust to be held at the Harvey Wheeler Community Center on Sunday, April 22nd, 2018 at 7 p.m. and proclaim the week of Sunday, April 8th through April 15th as days of remembrance for the victims of the Holocaust. Thank you. It's interesting how both of these proclamations are about the week of our town meeting. So we'll have lots to think about during town meeting.
Did you say that was April 22nd?
Well, but the week of the proclamation of the week, well, of Sunday, April 8th through April 15th.
Because of the holiday, the day that the state, the federal government did, that
Right.
they don't want to have the Harvey Wheeler with town during town meeting.
I understand we don't want to conflict with town meeting, but I'm just, lots to think about and be thankful for. Now we move on to Sunday. Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. I was absent in my start of the meeting. We have our clerk is away on personal business this week, so we need a nomination for a new clerk.
I nominate Alice Kaufman to serve as clerk.
Second,
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
I move to approve the consent agenda as read.
Well, we still have a few more things to add.
Sorry about that.
But all right.
I thought you were done.
Nope. Sunday entertainment licenses, Concord Orchestra on May 20th from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m., 51 Walden Street for a concert. And a Class 2 license renewal for John E. Richardson Classic Car Sales, 17 Belknap Street.
I move to approve the consent agenda as read.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Town Manager, it's your turn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This weekend, on Saturday, April 7th, is the Marion's Corner Parade and Ceremony. The parade steps off at 1 p.m. from the Ripley School. And then, of course, April 16th is the Patriots Day Parade. There's an alt-right group that is posted on their website that they would call the Proud Boys of New England. That say they're planning to have an event at the Minuteman National Historical Park at noon on the 16th, Patriots Day. Our parade is from 9 to noon. They have not requested nor received a permit from the national park, but the park has designated free speech areas. Their theme is freedom of speech. So our local police department is working closely with the National Park Service and state and federal officials to keep an eye on things to make sure we do everything we can to protect the public in the event they do come in. This is the same group that had an event in Boston on November 18th. It didn't really come off because they were overwhelmed, I think, by counter protesters. But we are preparing for that. Tomorrow evening, Tuesday, April 3rd, at Harvey Wheeler's third and final session of Mapping the Road to Town Meeting, sponsored by the League of Women Voters. That's again at Harvey Wheeler Center, 7:30. And town meeting, of course, convenes next Monday night at the Regional High School. Public Works Department has been very busy. They're transitioning between winter and spring. They are still spending, they expect it to take another 6 weeks or so to clean up all of the roadside debris. They have 3 crews, chipper crews, working to chip up all the brush and debris, but it's.
Can I ask you a quick
there's
question
lot
on that?
coming down. Sure.
I've noticed a lot of residents in town are putting the debris from their perhaps backyards out towards the, on the other side or at the curb. Are we picking that up?
Public Works has announced that they're not. They're
Okay.
picking up the debris from public shade trees that falls on the
Yeah.
front lawns, but if the debris falls in your backyard, you're not.
I may be wrong
encouraged
about
to.
where it's coming from, it just
Right.
seems like there's a
So-
lot of it.
But there were 435 cars that visited the compost site on Walden Street to drop off the material that they picked up in their yards. So it's, that was, they think, a record. That's quite a few cars for just Saturday only, and so people are taking advantage of that. The NRC went forward with its spring cleanup, and the yellow bags are around town, so the Public Works Department picks those up as part of their contribution to the effort. And then, of course, Public Works is getting ready for the parade, cleaning things up. The comprehensive long-range plan, again, the public meeting is on April 25th. I'm not sure what the location, it was Willard, is it still at Willard?
Yes, it is. I'm hearing.
I have Willard on my calendar.
Okay. The Visitor Center is opening on Friday, April 14th, for the public. There's a topping off ceremony for the Minuteman's High School, laying of the final piece of steel on April 12th at 11 a.m., rain or shine. Nagog Pond, what to say about the Nagog treatment facility. We were scheduled to have a hearing. We carefully orchestrated a meeting with the Acton Select Board that was scheduled to be last Thursday. We made them aware of the fact that it was Holy Thursday. They said that would be fine. We have meetings on Holy Thursday from time to time, but in the end they canceled the public hearing on the remand of our special permit. So where we go from here, it's not exactly clear. We'll be discussing with council. They've continued the hearing till the 26th, I think, of April. And lastly, the nuisance dog. The family contacted us to say they have not purchased and installed the fencing that the board required. They've asked for additional time to do that. I recommend that if we allow any additional time, it'd be only till we get through town meeting and at your next regular business meeting on April 23rd, that we ask them to come in and tell us exactly what their plans are, because that was a firm date, April 1st to have the fence up. I understand there haven't been any complaints about the dog being at large, but it's
That was I don't think whether the dog was at large, but the trigger date, one of their agreements was
Yep.
the fence up or a contract
and they
demonstrated.
haven't produced either. So
Is there any chance that the fence would, do they give an indication that they would put up a fence by April 23rd?
no, I think they indicated that it would be a hardship for them to install a fence. So that's why I suggest we invite them back in to for your meeting on the 23rd to explain what the next step would be.
Chris, regarding that particular group scheduling or planning to, be present at the Minuteman National Park, can you share that information with the public ceremonies folks?
The police chief was in touch with John Arena
Okay.
last week, so he's kept him up.
Are those free speech zones near the event at Minuteman National
They're in
Park?
the national, they're in the parking lot near the Cesar Robbins house, I believe, is one of the locations. And I don't know if there's another one closer to the Buttrick Estate or where the other. I think there's two, so you can't just have a free speech event in the park. You have to be in
Which
the
is fine,
designated area.
I just was wondering where that zone was.
I know that one is in the parking lot, in the main parking lot near the Cesar Robbins house. I'm not sure where the other one is.
Just because the procession's very porous in terms of interaction with the public, so just a little concerned about that. But it sounds like if that's controlled, I think Concord Police will be right there. That'd be great. Thank
And
you.
they do need a permit
You do need a permit,
from the Park Service for that?
either for the Park Service.
Does the Park Service mention they have enough manpower for that?
They know that they don't. They have a limited number of park rangers, so they've asked for assistance from Concord, and the police chief has been in touch with the NEMLIC, the Northeast Massachusetts Law Enforcement folks, so he has
Busy day, though.
a number of police officers at his call, but you're right, a lot of them will be tied up with the Boston Marathon. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up on our agenda is to discuss the Giroux land acquisition and future use of the property. I know there's some folks here from, I think Kate Hodges, who's in the lead for the town.
Yeah, I thought it'd be helpful if Kate just shares the graphics that she can
Right,
put up on the
background.
screen and provide some background.
That would be useful. I think some of this is kind of a way of opening some of the thoughts we've gathered going into town meeting and sharing them as a select board meeting before we actually head into town meeting next week.
Thank you. My name is Kate Hodges. I'm Assistant Town Manager. Just have a couple of slides, very short. The bottom left-hand side of the photo above shows the 3 parcels which are for sale, which total 7.03 acres. The smallest parcel in the center is less than 1 acre and has a small Cape Cod-style dwelling with a little over 1,600 feet of frontage on Warner's Pond. It's labeled here as 369 Commonwealth Avenue. The other 2 parcels are 37Y and 37B, which make up the majority of the acreage. In May of 1951, a portion of the subject land was approved for a subdivision into 7 building lots, which ranged in size from about 9,000 to 26,500 square feet. The plan was recorded with the South Middlesex Registry of Deeds in 1952. At this time, the town believes that the highest and best use for the property, should the purchase be voted in affirmative at town meeting, would be the combination of active and passive recreation for the entire parcels.
And that's Article 25 at town meeting.
Yes.
It is.
The top left is the current GIS aerial photo, and the bottom or the right-hand side is a photo from the Director of Planning and Land Management, taken of the front of the home that's there in the center taken from Warner's Pond. Warner's Pond is located immediately to the south of the property. It's a 54-acre body of water within a larger parcel that totals 77 acres. The pond was created in the 1800s by Concordians who wished to dam the Neshoba Brook to create a water power for the nearby mills. The average depth of the pond is about 4.5 feet. However, there are a few sections that reach 12 feet in depth, particularly in the cooler months. This shows the abutting property to the west, which is marked here with a star, is 67 acres of conservation and agricultural land owned by MCI Concord. The land is leased currently to farmers who grow crops. The north is the former rail trail, which is being transitioned as phase 2 of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail project. The bike path, once complete, will be 27 miles in length, extending from Framingham to Chelmsford. The remaining red areas located on the map depict the other town-owned parcel held in the majority by the Natural Resources and Conservation Divisions. However, there are 2 parcels along Commonwealth Avenue that are owned by the Concord Housing Authority. I've indicated those 2 here. These particular photos are taken from the property and they serve as an example of its openness and beauty, taking into account all of the factors discussed above, including the available and segmented space for open recreation, swimming, fishing, boating capabilities, recreational mixed-use planning, the proximity to other recreational amenities, including the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, and the ability to preserve most of the open parcel with the surrounding water. My office has worked with the recreation and the land management staff to develop a plan for the entire property, which when complete would be a wonderfully open and active recreational opportunity for West Concord. This is our working schematic. Only conceptual at this time. It shows the existing home being removed to make way for a bathhouse. The restroom and changing facility would be located primarily in that structure. It shows gravel parking off of the existing roadway for about a dozen vehicles, gravel walking paths that would connect the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail and the future rail trail parking lot that's along Commonwealth Ave with our park parcels. It has a designated fishing and canoe launch located at the far west end of the property, accessible through gravel paths and purposeful trails. The largest undertaking, however, for the property would be the creation of a public bathing beach. In May of 2012, the Warner's Pond Management Plan was revised, and a report was issued that showcased the unique properties and outlines for this resource. When looking at the sampled area studies, it was determined that a swim area located directly in front of where the existing house is would be most conducive to the public's use of the pond. Because the plant covering was the lowest at this location and the water level portion of the pond was the lowest here as well. The only other area of the pond, as note, where this water is shallow, where the water is as shallow as it is in front of the home, is all the way on the west end. There's no means of public egress, and that particular part of the pond abuts MCI property and the MCI-owned cemetery. So there really would be no way for the town of Concord to be able to build anything to be able to get that, to access that area. So that's sort of where we are now. I'll leave this picture up in case anybody has any questions. And, the seller has signed an agreement for a purchase price, and we are working on having a purchase and sale agreement. The seller has indicated that they would not be amenable to signing a purchase and sale agreement until after town meeting, until it's approved. Part of the reason that we were able to negotiate the price that we did is because the family very much wants this to be a named open space and recreational park property. I think in talking with the family about other uses, there was some indication that they may want to change the price, although nothing concrete has come from that. So I think it's just an ongoing discussion, but we have a very good relationship with the family, and I suspect that will continue.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that you wanted to have speak on this to clarify? Okay. I wanted to, so I'm going to be speaking for the select board when this comes up at town meeting. And I was with Kate when we did a walkthrough with a number of folks who were interested in looking at the house and the property from the affordable housing community writ large, because there were some concerns that the process that we honor in Concord about bringing in the affordable housing community early on had not been specifically honored. I think that there was never any hidden piece of this, but we hadn't, walked the trail, so to speak. And it was interesting because the longer I had spent on that property with bias, that I was on the West Concord Advisory Committee. So I've known about this property for a long time because it's been one of the jewels for the West Concord community. It's mentioned in the West Concord Master Plan, which predates my tenure. And it occurred to me that the most likely beneficiaries of a public recreation area such as this are the exact same community that will benefit from lower, more affordable housing, because that's a community that is less likely to have their own swimming pools. It's less likely to have a place to go put in their boat. And so I actually see this in this current form, seeing, meeting the needs on a whole lot of levels, perhaps as directly as if there was housing or a house for affordable uses on the property. That's my 2 cents and my thoughts about the property thus far. With that having been said, are there other members of the board that want to chime in before we listen to? I see people here that I'm guessing are here in part to talk about this.
Well, there was a walkthrough last week, right?
Yeah, that's, yeah.
People's perceptions
Yeah.
of what the outcome of that was.
I'm not sure anybody.
Okay.
Holly, you were there, exactly.
Want to hear from me now?
Please do.
Not very quick.
And you need to identify yourself.
My name is Holly Darzan. live at 155 Heath Bridge Road. I'm a member of the Concord Housing Foundation. I'm also on the Concord Affordable Housing Funding Committee, but I'm really here more as the foundation. And I'll be brief, but I want to try to stick to my script here. You know what happens when you don't do that. So first, thanks to Kate for taking us, thank you, taking us on the tour to the house. There were several affordable housing advocates there. We were pleased at the condition of the house. It's really quite good. And it's set up well for a family. It's got 3 bedrooms, and not only that, but it has a bedroom and full bath on the first floor, so it would accommodate somebody who might have limited mobility issues. And we appreciate that you've given us the opportunity to talk about this. The goal of the Concord Housing Foundation and other affordable housing supporters is not to be at cross purposes with the select board's proposed use of the site for recreation, but rather to help optimize the 7-acre parcel by reusing the existing house for a new affordable home, perhaps for a town employee, and to establish it as affordable in perpetuity. The 2 units in the farmhouse at the McGrath House are a good example of how the Concord Housing Foundation and other affordable housing advocates help the town with renovation monies to add affordable homes to Concord as part of a land acquisition project. The Giroux land has ample room to accommodate more than one use, and we hope it can be responsive to the fact that affordable housing registers as one of the top priorities in the survey in the Finance Committee report. Adding to the town's affordable housing inventory is so challenging in Concord. I come from the Housing Trust from many years back, and I remember how hard it is to get land. We feel it's critical to seize this opportunity. The site is very roomy. It could easily allow sharing of various uses. Moreover, having the house occupied could possibly dovetail well with the recreation use by providing some eyes on the property after hours as a deterrent to mischief. As an architect, which I've been for a long time, with quite a bit of land planning experience, I feel that some careful planning is key to optimizing the use of what would be a rich town asset. So our request is that the town assert that it is open to that planning by revising the town meeting presentation, as Terry Rothermill suggested to Chris Whalen and Kate Hodges, which is to insert wording in the current article after, quote, for municipal purposes, including active recreation, to add, and affordable housing purposes. The moderator has approved such an amendment to be within the scope of the article. The amendment would be either inserted by the town or by housing advocates who would propose the amendment from the floor, but preferably the former. And the other thing we would ask is if, in fact, that graphic is used in the town meeting presentation, to revise it so that this house is not shown to be definitely demolished and replaced with a bathhouse, which could be located somewhere else on the site. The Concord Housing Foundation is confident that it can raise money to help to bring the house in a good position to be occupied. It's in good shape now. It needs a little modernizing.
Thank you.
There are other housing advocates here. Somebody else may have other things to say.
Oh, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I was just curious, when I have not seen the inside of the house, how is it possible the house could be moved to another location on that site?
I think it is possible, but as I understand from, I think there's other examples in the town where relocating a house was difficult or met with opposition. I've been involved with projects that have moved houses. It's not that hard. It's more money. You end up spending a lot more money for something that if you can make it work with where it is, you're better off where it is. My guess, and I'm only guessing from what I've seen, is that the septic system for the house is probably where the new parking is shown. There's a big lawn on that side of the house, on this road, not the water side, but the other side. It looks like it's probably where the septic is because that's where the pipes go out of the basement. That doesn't have any evidence of having passed Title V, but so I'm guessing that's one of the costs could go with the new plan, even if it's a bathhouse. So I would just, you have to be aware of where is Title V gonna work and where it's not gonna work.
It sounds like we'd have to contend with a Title V septic.
If you're going to put any bathrooms on the site, yes, or have somebody live in
Which
the
I think
house.
is the intent.
Yes, yes. Does anybody have any other questions?
Thanks. Sorry, thank you very much. Are there others that wish to speak? Jeff? See.
Thanks, I'm Jeff Collins, 55 Highland Street, Chair of the West Concord Advisory Committee. The Advisory Committee voted at our previous meeting last month strongly in favor of Article 25. I'm very excited about the potential for acquisition and reuse of the site for recreation and open space. We haven't discussed specifically the concept of adding affordable housing to the warrant article, but we've discussed the concept over the past several months and don't feel that's compatible use with this site. We think through the West Concord master planning process, we've tried to identify parts of the town that can, parts of the village that can accommodate the multiple needs of the community. We recently voted in support of the Junction Village Affordable Housing Development project to meet that specific need and that sort of best use for that site. This site, having walked the site myself, I personally feel that location of the house is incompatible with this plan that Kate's presenting here, this draft, and based on where the lawn is, where the woods are, on the rest of the site, the house would be on second base. It's right where all the use would be. And I don't see a family being happy there in the middle of a parking lot, or people coming to the site for recreation or enjoyment of open space, being comfortable with a house in that site. So when we look at plans, the West Concord Master Plan, the Open Space Plan, the Community Preservation Committee's framework for open space acquisition, where we talk about protection of water resources, protection of open space, connection to the village centers, connection to trails like the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. This is exactly what we'd be looking for passive and active recreation. And as we continue to work with other committees and advocates in town on meeting affordable housing needs, we think there are other better locations in West Concord to meet those needs, and this is a special opportunity to provide close by recreation open space for the village.
So what you're saying is that you don't feel that 7 acres, you couldn't put this swimming facility, fishing area, and even 2 or 3 homes on this property, and that's not enough area to pull that off?
I think if the assistant town manager is able to go back one slide or two to the whole site there.
Oh, is this one better?
Yeah, that or two back even. Yeah, you can see how the parcel sort of tapers off at either end. So that on the near end, you've got the driveway coming in right against the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. You can't see in this image. Then the slope drops down towards the pond. It continues with quite a steep slope in front of the house. You've got the existing parking and driveway kind of coming on the north side of the existing house. Then you're up against the rail trail. And as you go back, it's wooded. There's a little bit more topography in there. And both, again, for the sort of the opportunity to be a gateway to the village on the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, and to have both passive and quiet water access and protection of the water resource. I think it's a tight site to squeeze multiple uses on.
Excuse me, Steve. I also am happy to pass this along, but this is the depth chart that you can see, and I'm sorry that it's not on the screen, but I can make sure that it's part of the slide at town meeting. So the area near the house, the existing house, as I had said, is the shallow area, and actually the only areas of the pond that drop to the 12-foot mark are on either side. So the rest of the frontage off of this parcel range from a 9-foot drop to over 11 feet.
For access into the
for access
water.
into the water
Yeah,
for a
no,
public
I
bathing beach.
understand.
So, and that's not to say that that absolutely has to happen, but that was part of the thinking.
Anybody else have any questions for Jeff? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Is there anybody else here who would like to comment? Okay, sure. Who's going first? Maynard, I didn't see you.
Maynard
You
Forbes,
need to come to the mic, unfortunately. Yep.
Maynard Forbes, 27-3 Concord Green. I attended the West Concord Advisory Committee meeting where they made the decision and made a reasonably strong statement. It was based on, basically, the town should not lose the chance to buy this property. I understand that there are two thoughts going on here. Buy the property, argue it out later. I would, I think, yield more to the recreation part of it. Again, the question of moving the house, since the site is, since it's right, basically a third of the way up, move it back, or move it way down, so it's a separate entity, and have the recreation as a separate entity. Don't lose the property. Thank you.
Thank you, Maynard. Is there somebody else? I know I saw some. Anybody else? Linda? Soon to be up here.
Linda Escobedo, Wedgwood comment. Currently the chair of the Concord Housing Authority and member-elect of the Select Board, but I'm speaking for myself. Let me first say that I respect all the good work that's probably gone into this as already and by many departments across the town. And I do recognize that this property is really a unique opportunity to enhance the town's recreational activities. And I support that goal, so I want to be clear about that. But I also think unique to this property is the simultaneous opportunity to capture an affordable housing, a home, and possibly one that would benefit one of our town employees. The 2013 Comprehensive Long-Range Plan draft that's currently being circulated reiterates the challenge of the town meeting competing goals for open space, recreation, and housing. And I think that, and particularly given the scarcity and the high price of land, but the vision in the Comprehensive Long-Range Plan also talks about an integrated planning and land use approach whenever possible, and it's encouraged. And I do think that this particular property, the Gower property, offers just such an opportunity, and I would hope that the Select Board and the town will act on that affirmatively. So thank you.
Thanks, Linda.
Before you leave, I just, having you both at the table here, should congratulate Jane on her re-election and congratulate you on your election to the Select Board. We look forward to having you up here soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Linda.
Steve Carr of Musterfield Road and on the Housing Foundation. The point I would make is that if I were involved with the development or planning for this land, which I am all in favor of used for recreation purposes, and I looked at that chart and I didn't have housing in mind, I might say the very best place for the bathhouse or something or other is where the house is now. But I think the question to all of us is, shouldn't we have housing in mind? And if we had approached the discussions, whenever, a year or so ago, and we had housing in mind, wouldn't we maybe have thought we should think about keeping the house and putting the bathhouse somewhere else? And I think that's what we should at least still be thinking about. I don't know what the right answer is, but I don't think we should be foreclosing that question.
and I think we should be examining it. There are 7 acres is a lot of land, and I hope it's going to be, used wisely. But I don't think just because we started down one particular road, and we didn't, unfortunately, I don't want to get into that, think about housing the way maybe we might have. Now we're thinking about housing, and we should rethink the question, and maybe, putting the bathhouse somewhere else is only a 92 on a scale of 1 to 100, but saving the house and using it for housing is a 30. And you add 30 and 92, and you get a better result than just going ahead with what you're talking about. So I would hope that you would consider that, and I hope that I suspect the town might well support that consideration.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to speak? Okay.
So
Any
let
thoughts from
me,
the board?
maybe my fellow board members can help me here. So the language that we are being asked to include either as an amendment from the floor or before it gets to town meeting, have an amendment to the article. Request that the town purchase property and consider what we can do about affordable housing on the property.
I think the language proposed was that to acquire the property for municipal purposes, which is a broad category, covers everything,
Including housing.
including active recreation. It was the original motion that was planned, and I think Mr. Rothermel has proposed that it say including active recreation and affordable housing. I think that's a simple amendment that he would propose. That's what his emails.
I'm just making sure I understand that the intent of the language change is a commitment to maintaining at least one affordable unit on that property with the sale, or the town to consider as we move ahead to figure out how best to develop it as a recreational site, how to incorporate a house.
So I don't think it specifies, that language doesn't specify that there must be 1 unit or 3 units or any specific amount.
That's not the intent that I heard. The intent was to include it as an option in planning. So if we purchased it with that amendment in there, we've got a plan, rough sketched out plan for recreation. We would want to see then a second plan roughed out that talked about having affordable housing and recreation. And
It's just to have further discussion and dialogue on, what redesign.
and we would have to conclude on which of the options we thought was the best use for the town. Is that the way
That's
you-
right, yeah, exactly.
My concern is, it's a hard dilemma, because we need good recreation, we need housing for sure. But I heard Kate, when she spoke earlier, talk about some reluctance on the part of the buyer at the price that we've been able to negotiate. And that if in fact it had the potential for housing on it, did he indicate even a single unit that the price would change, or if it was primarily recreation?
His initial the representative's initial response to me was that he would like then to put the entire parcel back on the open market, and he would not agree to the price that we had agreed upon. That's not final by any means. If I were to show him a plan, I'm sorry, like you talked about, that had the home in with recreation, he may change his mind. I don't know, but I know that he was adamant that they had come down to the price with the idea of having it be entitled Giroux Recreational Park, and that was
So the
important to
naming
them.
rights to this were also important.
Yeah, I mean, his direct quote was, "That's worth something to us, and if that plan is going to change, we want the ability to be able to change our opinion." And
Marcia?
Marcia Rasmussen, Director of Planning and Land Management. I just wanted to clarify an issue that is a little bit of concern to me. If the house remains on the site and remains in town ownership, we would have to find somebody through a lease process. Town employees would not be eligible for that process. We would have to have it open and if we want to include it as an affordable unit on the state subsidized housing inventory, we would have to make it available to anyone. So it needs to be a wide open.
They'd be eligible, they just, we couldn't restrict it.
Well, if we are leasing it,
They're
we
not.
cannot. I think we've considered this issue with regard to the Wheeler Harrington House. We cannot, town employees will not be eligible to respond to any RFP for the lease of the Wheeler Harrington House. So I'm just extending that, town employees would not be eligible. So I just want to clarify that town employees will not be able to live here if it remains as a town-owned home.
And just for clarification on that,
Thank you, Marcia.
Marcia and I were discussing, and it really isn't as much of a procurement issue as it is the Fair Standard Labor Act, where if we have somebody living in a town-owned property and presumably they're doing either work on it or, in this case, providing some level of security, that's considered doing work for the town. And so it's either that they have a salaried position, and so they would have 2 positions in the town for divided loyalties, or if they were an hourly employee, there would be an overtime. And so I ended up contacting the AG's office just to make sure that I understood that, because I recognize the Wheeler Harrington House, we're going to be going out for another RFP, and there may be folks in town who work here that might be interested in that, and it was confirmed that in fact would open the town up to liability.
Thank you. Did you want to come back to
I'm
Mike?
not sure if I can ask you, okay. When you say,
I'm sorry, I hate to do that.
sorry,
but-
all right. Steve Carr again. When you say the town, if the town owned it, would that include the housing authority? Does it include the CHDC, or is it just the town?
I couldn't speak specifically to that, because when I contacted, we were talking about a leased property that the town owns. So I'm happy to reach back out and say if the title owner was different. But they were speaking in very broad terms when I talked to them last week, just saying, on the surface, the town is the town. And so their litmus test was, would it survive litigation? And they advised that it likely would not, and so we might want to err on the side of caution. But
It's also possible the town is the town, and the town is not the CHDC or the housing authority.
That's a good point.
Because those are different, those are technically different organizations, so I'm just pointing that out.
Thank you.
And while I'm here, one more comment. I have no idea what the negotiations have been and everything like that. And I suspect that none of us in the room have any idea at this point what would happen if somebody went back to the sellers and said, here's a plan. It keeps your house. Maybe they don't have any sentimental attachment to the house. I have no idea. But here's what we would arrange it. The naming would still be the same. And how would you feel about that? And the only way probably we're going to find out is to ask them.
Thank you. Anything further? Okay, thank you.
Well,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I gotta say, the APP process, the obligations of this board, I feel we failed the affordable people. I mean, I'm personally feeling responsible for that, for not pushing that harder with this group. I think we're obligated to make sure that these people in this room have the time to review what we're reviewing. So now they've gotten that information, say, a couple of weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, and I think that's a concern. I think what we're hearing is a lot of negativity here, and I don't see it as a problem to make the facility as Kate's drawn it, although I had a couple ideas to make it a little better, but that's. I wouldn't fight on the affordable housing side. I wouldn't keep the existing home. I'd rather say, let's just go further down the road and make 3 new units, or provide that as an opportunity for housing, so that you have your beach, your swimming hole, and all the stuff that's on that plan, and then just if you wanted to live like 3 townhouses next to each other, right, you get access to the trail, or you park your car off the driveway. I think there's plenty of room for that. But I think that's something we should talk about, is the process here, is because they're kind of trying to catch up now. And I don't think there was really a good faith effort to open the door and have them included in the conversation. I think that's our responsibility to do that, so, I mean, I think we have to have that conversation, or at least figure out a way to have them at the table in the conversation.
Jeff, did you want to offer something?
Jeff Collins again, just being familiar with a few other previous meetings where the opportunity has come up, and I'm not familiar with a formal process that flows from that previous warrant article about involving or considering affordable housing, but this had been discussed, as you know, in the CPC slate of projects over many previous months. I know I specifically or personally discussed the site with Mr. Rothamel at a comprehensive long-range plan sort of forum in early November about open space and housing. So that's not part of a formal process, but there it was sort of in the air as the concept was coming together, I think.
Okay, maybe this is an opportunity for me to explain what the formal process is. In 2008, Mr. Rothamel brought an article to town meeting and asked the town to vote that at any time that the select board and town manager enter into negotiations to purchase property, that a representative from affordable housing interests would be at the table involved in the conversation. That vote was approved at the 2008 town meeting, and the select board subsequently adopted APP 53, which says that we will offer affordable housing interests a seat at the table when open space purchases are taking place, and requires us to notify them. And in this case, Mr. Lawson reminded me, it was just about a year ago, early April of last year, the board voted to enter into negotiations to purchase this property. Mr. Lawson said, be sure you contact the affordable housing folks. I think you specified the CHDC. And I did not do that. So that was my failure, just so there's no, that's the elephant in the room. And I know that there's informal conversation throughout the fall is financing this and CPA funding for this project. But no, as Steve said, no formal opportunity to participate in the negotiations or planning for the property was done as is required by your policy.
Why? Thank you. Yes. Are there any other? Frog in the throat. Any other?
What is our path forward that we're going to try to do this evening? Because I would be,
Mike, I suggested we have this conversation just so that the first opportunity to discuss it for both folks wasn't at town meeting. So I think the housing folks have been very reasonable, I think, in saying, can we have an opportunity to talk about this? In the end, I think the select board will decide what the use of the property is. If town meeting authorizes you to acquire it, you'll determine what the purposes are.
again, I mean, if it wasn't for the concern I have about losing the opportunity, I would be supportive of this amendment, because I think we kind of dropped the ball a little bit. I don't think it was hidden, but we had a task to do and we did get it done. But if it means that we would lose the opportunity to purchase this property because of the owner's views, so I think we need to get some real clarity, if it's possible, from the owner. We're going to have Kate talk to him. She's been doing all the work on
So she got his initial reaction was, well, if there's going to be any housing, then I should sell it to a developer for my top
But I
price,
think she
my
could go
asking
back
price.
with the
But-
notion that some
Right.
a unit of affordable housing, or a couple
Right.
units, something like that, not as a big development.
Right.
And you try to help meet 2 goals of Concord, having open housing recreation and also having affordable housing. But if he has the view that he's going to sell it to us only at market rate, then I think we just need to talk to our friends in the housing community and hope they'll understand that this is the best use of that land. And we'll attack the housing problem the next time we can.
My initial discussion with him wasn't about multiple homes, it was about the existing home, and if that were to remain on the property, even if we moved it. So I asked him both scenarios, if it were to remain and something was created around it, if it were to remain and nothing was created around it, or if we were to move it someplace within the other 7 acres. And he had said that the agreement and on the purchase price that he came to was with the understanding that all 7+ acres would be active recreation and passive recreational property. So,
You're convinced that that's a firm position that?
well, I think
Well, you were there.
he was not unclear. But that doesn't mean that if I went back and said, this is the will of the town and this is what they decided, and that he would reconsider. He, representing the family, he was not unclear with me the first time we met when we discussed a purchase price, and we were able to work that out. But he was very disappointed. And then he reached back out after he was able to talk to his family members and said that they collectively were very disappointed, that they didn't have a real attachment necessarily to the home, and their attachment was to the property. And the idea of having, he said, potentially thousands of people, including their own grandkids, able to come and play there and have it sort of be an open area, and leaving the wooded area somewhat wooded, they liked that. That had value to them, and they were willing to take less than what they had hoped for.
Well, it seems to me that in the middle of this conversation, I think Maynard seemed to offer the thought of, and I think everybody in the room has echoed the importance of the town acquiring this land. And if there was a motion, whether we included it directly or on the floor, to consider, do you think that the simple act of having said consider affordable housing or the use of that house, do you think that would affect? In other words, would that trigger his concern? You don't know.
I don't know. I think that it may, if that's what he was requesting is that we have the purpose and the language somewhat spelled out in the purchase and sale.
Okay.
And so if the language in the purchase and the sale is broad like that, they may choose not to sign it. But I really don't know till I ask him. My last conversation with him was pretty lengthy, and like I said, he was not unclear.
Maynard, did you want to join us at the mic?
Just a couple of words. Don't lose the property.
Thank you. Did you want to join us?
Sure. Hi, I'm Karen Curry. I live in West Concord. I'm also a new member of the West Concord Advisory Committee. Personally, from my own perspective, I think there is a lot more maybe affordable housing over in West Concord. So we do have a decent amount there already, number one. And number two, we do not have any recreation on our side of town that even comes close to Emerson Park here and what's available and the opportunities of things to do there. And I think that this is a great piece of property. I think it would be fantastic if we can develop into a recreational facility per the family's request. And that's my personal perspective. It's not coming specifically from the committee, but as a resident of West Concord, I don't think we should lose it, and I think it would be something that everyone could enjoy.
Thank you. Sure. And I've reminded my fellow select board members, this is not yet public comment, so I'm going to move us on. I believe we have fully discussed the Giroux land acquisition that has been here. And we're going to move on to reviewing and approving 2229 Main Street reuse and planning recharge. Thank you all.
with respect to the Giroux issue.
You're on my-
I know.
Okay, all right, that's up.
We're having a meeting.
I know.
If there is going to be an amendment offered from the floor,
Right.
which I suspect there will be, then I don't, we should have a position on that.
So Terry Rothmel suggested in an email to me that the town and the board modify their motion to insert and affordable housing as one of the purposes for which the property, so you could consider that, and discuss that tonight or Monday night. And then it makes sense to take a position on that amendment.
So my concern, I think, has already been
Right.
raised, that we don't know whether we lose the property with
Right.
that commitment.
And I think that the town meeting, if town meeting is comfortable authorizing the board to acquire it under terms and conditions that you agree to, then you can leave it to the negotiation of the purchase and sale to determine whether the difference is $500,000 in the purchase price between having no housing and at the moment having one unit of housing.
Potentially.
Potentially. That was the seller's opening salvo.
Ah.
Just to comment on the 500,000. And again, I don't know what the negotiations are, and who knows, and I don't know whether the town is getting a bargain at this price, or whether or not. But there are other sources for $500,000 in this town, and that's one of the considerations that why we, the housing people, would like to know, what's going on and to be able to participate. We've been able to raise money in the past, and it's conceivable we could raise the $500,000. So I just want you to know.
And I think to Steve's point, we all acknowledge that this has not been as formal a process up to date, so thank you. All right. On to 2229 Main Street.
This is a rough first draft of a committee charge for possible reuse of the property if the town acquires the property at 2229 Main Street.
What's known as Star Met or anything
The
else?
Starmet site, 46 acres. Andrew has already pointed out a large number of typos and incomplete thoughts. But I welcome others that the board may have identified.
I like the committee size. 7 is probably pretty good. 3 citizens at large is good. I wouldn't be surprised neighbors or residents in the neighborhood would like to participate, and they were probably members of the 2229 Main Street committee. And I like that the committee reports to the select board, and we've got some planning expertise in there. It seems pretty. It seems.
I thought it seemed.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
I agree with Steve. I like the composition of the committee. I
Yeah.
think you got that exactly right.
I would just, to your point, Steve, since we're going to have 2 representatives from the 2229 Main Street Oversight Committee, which I think is great, I think we should hope to find the 3 citizens at large not,
Yeah,
Not
affiliated
affiliated.
with that, right?
it's not a backdoor to have.
Some balance.
So, yeah, exactly.
Because it would be great to have some fresh eyes on it as well. Once you
Right.
kind of explain the areas and what you can do here or not here, or throughout the site, I think that could open up all the possibilities.
What about a member from the housing, the affordable housing community?
That would be timely.
That would seem to me to be a good act, we'll just add that.
So you have a total of 8 members, which is a
Or
lot.
we can,
We should go to 9 then.
either go down, either
Either
down
not.
Go
citizens
citizens at large,
to
2,
2, and
and
add
town
one
housing,
housing.
and keep it at 7. It's 9, it's
Great, especially because this is a very specific chart, I mean, this is time sensitive.
Right. And limited duration.
Yeah, that's fine.
So we'll look to finalize it. I'm thinking at your first meeting after town meeting, you'll know if the funding has been provided. You'll still need to do some planning for the StarMed site, whether the funding is approved or not, it seems to me, but at least show a clearer picture of what the committee will have to work with after town meeting.
Well, even if we didn't get funding, though, would we
You-
want to get a committee put together?
I think so.
Someone's
Yeah.
got to start looking at this. I'd be in
Yep.
favor of
You wanna do it
doing it Monday,
Right.
on the
Okay.
9th at 6 o'clock.
So yeah, let me correct the
6:30.
significant number of typos and get your draft number 2.
To the select board. I'm just- Thank you. So I guess I was hoping to hear from Marcia about the reporting, whether this is inherently a planning process or whether it is appropriately charged by the select board. So the property is, we're talking about development committee, obviously, to think about and plan for the use of the StarMed Superfund site once it's cleaned up. And are you comfortable with the process being done by a committee that reports to the select board? Or would you see this as a committee that works more closely with the planning board?
I think it could go either way, but it's probably better for the select board to be hearing from this committee, primarily because we're talking about a land acquisition, we're talking about certain liability. If we are to acquire the property, I know that
Those institutional controls that
Right.
EPA will be looking for, they're
Right.
gonna want.
are really
Another
for you.
limitation on the
So-
property as well.
Well, this plan would be, I don't want to say totally conceptual, but at a pretty high level. I would want to kind of turn it over to a more detailed planning
Right.
committee working with Marcia, once we sort of agree to the general plan.
I think we need to understand what the limitations are with certain areas of the property, but explore the full range of possibilities and opportunities. And I think that's where it could be all over the place. It could be, there's a beautiful cranberry bog, there might be some environmental or natural uses, but there might be playing fields, or it might be a great facility that you want to put in that's built on top of everything and doesn't use any of the groundwater, doesn't break, So there's so many possibilities. And then the housing component, I know that this property directly abuts Minuteman Arc, which is over on Forest Ridge Road. There may be some opportunities there, so.
I just wanted to hear from you, I hadn't heard from you, to get your opinion about a planning activity outside of your realm here, but thank you.
Any other discussions by the board? Okay. So we'll look to see another draft and maybe move on this on Monday.
Okay.
Great. So now we're going to review and approve the Junction Village Open Space Planning Task Force charge.
So this is your first look at this. Marcia is here to talk about that. She drafted the committee charge. And so Marcia, maybe you could give us an overview of what you're thinking.
As you recall, the Junction Village site is a 12-acre site. They will only be using half of it for the 83-unit assisted living project, which means there's 6 acres that abut the Assabet River that have the potential to be a beautiful walking trail. And different people have been looking at it from different aspects. The plans that were approved for Junction Village do show conceptual paths that go along the river. We thought it would be great to have a formal process with a public outreach so that we could be sure that all the uses, potential uses, have been identified, and that there's some active participation in the community.
But this is also about the triangle, so not just talking about the.
There were 2
because there's
pieces.
2 pieces, and I think it's really clear to discuss that. Because that's just, well, in the charge that we're looking at, we delineate 2 very separate
Correct.
sections, and therefore separate use pattern, perhaps.
I think the trail has been designed so that it can accommodate both Junction Village residents. There's a separation there. It would be totally accessible by everybody. But they'd want to be able to direct Junction Village residents back toward the units, because I think their plan is to have it, have a loop around the building for people who don't want to travel as far. And to, because of the two different characteristics of the site, one being so close to the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, there were opportunities, it's fairly open, fairly barren, to put in plants that would stay low, and perhaps be good pollinator plants for those critters that like to pollinate. So, and then having the wooded area along the river. So there are two different characteristics, but the intent is to design both.
I thought it was a really good draft. I have one question, and that is whether, in addition to working with you folks, if the NRC should be included in there.
Well, one of the members would be through the NRC or appointed by the NRC, or a
I was
recommendation?
thinking of the department.
Absolutely. It's DPLM, is Planning and Land Management, which is, it includes natural resources, and I know Delia would be very interested in, and as well as Lord Capone, both would be valuable.
Marcia, should the charge include the study or discussion of like the level of the intensity of use? Like, is there a planned number of users? Like the intent of that, so maybe it's more pedestrian because of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, so we minimize the parking impact for like neighbors down that in that neighborhood, or yeah, I guess that was kind of a thought I had.
The intensity of use, I think, is expected to be fairly low, because it's going to be under a conservation restriction, but we also already did a preliminary open space concept that the Concord Housing Development Corporation funded. Jennifer Goldson
Yeah, I remember that.
did
Yeah.
an outreach. There was a site visit. There was some public discussion about that, and so some of the more intense uses were not included in that report.
Yeah, it wasn't favorably.
It was not favorably looked at, yes.
Did we mention dog leash or unleash? I just had to mention it tonight. We don't have to.
No comment.
Wise decision. We can tell short term.
Any other questions?
No, it's really good.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you very much. So, do you have any further discussion with the board?
I would look for a draft, I see the town managers referred to as the appointing authority in the early paragraphs. So perhaps again, you look for a second version, maybe on Monday. Yeah, correcting the first, that was in the first paragraph.
Oh, yeah.
Get both of these done on Monday.
We're posted for 6:30? Okay.
6:30.
Do you think we need to meet earlier?
We don't have anything else going on, other than taking positions on warrant articles. We're going to hear from the planning board who meets tomorrow night on some of the zoning articles.
Yep.
So if you think you need more time, we can post it earlier on Monday night.
Yeah, so the reservation starts at 6, I believe, so you have flexibility, but we just need to know.
I asked my colleagues, 6:30, couldn't it? What's that fast?
We'll have to be very speedy.
We don't have any other
Any other business?
business and reports of these, and then pretty much agreeing, we're just gonna get it cleaned up.
I see a Junction Village piece I don't see anything on our agenda, yet I see Liz, and I see something from the Regional Housing Services.
Again, I asked Andrew to include the report from the Regional Housing Services on Junction Village because it does refer to the open space plan.
Right.
So that's why you saw that document.
Right, so I just wanted to know if Liz Ross wanted to join us for any comments, or, because you are here, and I didn't want you to.
I am indeed here, yes. Hi, my name is Liz Russ. 201 Commonwealth Avenue and from the Regional Housing Services Office. So I did prepare that status update on Junction Village for the general leadership of the town, going into town meeting, covering all the different aspects that I thought that might come up or questions. So I didn't have anything particular, but it did talk about an anticipation of the open space task force. I think that that's something that might come up at town meeting. So the action that you take there, and CHCC would of course support that, and will be funding that landscape architect in support of that task force. The residential portion of the project is proceeding as planned, with no surprises, and everything check mark, and just going forward in terms of the funding submission
Any
and
indication
process.
of how the state is gonna go with that?
So that's gonna be a summertime kind of thing. I think DHCD is coming next week, I believe, like Thursday, for their site visit, and that's what they do for all of them. There were 93, I think, applications in November, and I'm gonna forget the numbers, like 60-something were invited to apply, and they expect to fund 30. So that's really how that process will go. It's a very strong project in terms of its development cost. Because it's assisted living, its per unit development cost is very low compared to larger units. And DHCD reports on their average per unit cost, so they like to get the assisted living projects in because it makes their per unit costs number, so it's attractive from that side. Grantham has had positive funding with DHCD, and that's very important for them to have developers who have been there and understand how to work with the public subsidies and how to make their projects conform to all those rigors. And then the strong local support. So those three things are very positive in favor of the project. The expectations were that it wouldn't get approved the first year. That would be beyond people's expectations, but that it would be approved for the second year.
And that would be this year.
Yeah, and I think that fits really with the town plan as well, because it lets this open space task force work happen. The open space task force and the open space master plan that comes out of there has to complete its work before the conservation restriction can be done. So the natural process would be to let that go. I mean, it could always be accelerated, but I think that giving it that 2 DHCD funding rounds is a natural cycle for this project.
Grantham will be at the meeting on the 12th, right? The walkthrough, or no?
Yes, oh yes, yep.
Do you know who from DHCD is gonna join us, or it's?
No, I don't think, Kate Racer is the senior manager, and I don't think it will be her, so it'll be her staff. And then Walter's also a Concord resident, Walter Ohanian, so he'll be at town meeting also, so if there are particular questions that come up relative to his project and the financing and the tax credit piece relative to the Tax Reform Act or something technical on
Questions
that.
came up at the public hearing.
Yeah.
It did, and so I included a little something in my status, but if there's more around that, he's certainly able to talk to that. No issues for your consideration, though, really.
All right, well, thank you.
Sure.
Thanks,
Moving on, we are going to ratify a decision to participate in the Edgewick Road litigation mediation. And I'm looking for a motion, since this is about appointing 2 members of our team.
Maybe yours, or maybe Steve would have to.
Steve is the
Make the first
motion.
You guys can second?
I can second.
You're allowed to second? All right.
When needed, I can.
Whereas the town has brought legal action against the butters concerning control of public access to the unpaved portion of Estabrook Road, the board approves the town's participation in mediation of said litigation with the abutters, and further, that Alice Kaufman and Michael Lawson shall each represent the town and the select board in said mediation, and may act on behalf of the select board to authorize the town manager to conditionally approve terms and conditions in principle that may be agreed to by all parties to the dispute, subject to the select board's review and approval of a final written settlement agreement.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
record, that was unanimous?
Yes, yes. I was missing one. So we'll move on to taking positions on warrant articles and preparing for town meeting. As reflected here, we don't expect, well, I'm just, unless there's a reason to discuss it further, I thought I would, are there any, we have just a few that we haven't taken positions on. There's Article 13, which I understand will now be moved in some form, but we don't know until tomorrow night what that number is.
Okay.
So, and obviously it could also not be moved, so we won't know anything until the school committee meets tomorrow night. So I would recommend that we hold off on that until.
What's involved in that article again?
That was as drafted, I believe it was $1 million for parking, or no,
Paving,
from
access
paving
roads
and
and lighting.
lighting. And we've heard discussions here from, and I also heard the chair's breakfast. There's still confusion as to what is gonna end up being moved.
Is that including parking spaces?
It's not on their agenda, I'm not.
If it's not on the agenda,
I didn't, I may be mistaken, but I.
Are they still taking positions on?
The electric bus
you're
run.
taking positions on articles? I'll be attending the planning board meeting tomorrow night, and I assume that they will finish taking positions.
So you can be, so again, Monday night we can.
So I'll go to the.
You're going to school committee, I'll go to planning board.
Yeah, because Tom is not.
Oh,
in
he's
town.
still out of town. Oh, thank you.
I was going to go to the League of Women Voters, and that probably gets off.
Too many meetings.
Oh,
Few of
no.
us.
It's true. I
Um,
have a meeting Thursday.
You're gonna move, all right, so I will come back to that one. What about, and we're gonna wait on the planning board on Article 27. And then Article 40, both Alice and Mike are recused. Can't even be in the room, I understand, for discussion. We were waiting on
Planning board,
planning board for that as well.
right? I think that was the planning board.
And Marcia provided some history, right? in
What about the historic districts, do you, was,
Oh, no, we're only waiting for planning
Leaving the
board.
Hubbardsville?
yeah.
Well, we're also waiting for
board.
planning board.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have,
What article is that?
that was Article 27.
I'm sorry.
And then this is Article 40, again, planning board.
Do not see it on their agenda for,
Nothing on taking positions on articles? No? Interesting.
just,
Well, maybe they're doing that at town meeting, I don't know. But I haven't heard.
yeah, we just need to coordinate that.
So, yeah,
They talked about it at the previous meeting.
going to meeting.
No, we're going to take positions tomorrow.
I'll just check your agenda, but just say it. So there was, there was one article that we took a position on, Article 38. And this is a zoning bylaw amendment that would incorporate sustainability principles in site plan review. And I just wanted us to think about whether we want to make a statement to support that. We already voted to support the article. It's not on the consent calendar. And it furthers the town's commitment to sustainability and resiliency by incorporating it into the site plan review.
And I am mentioning it in my remarks for Article 23, thanks to your.
I think where you're including a gym. Oh, maybe that is it. Maybe that is it. Yeah, okay. Oh, maybe you're right. Yes, no, yes.
So would that be enough of it?
No, I think a brief statement could be put together by Alice.
I think Alice
Okay.
looks like a perfect person to do
I
that.
mean, it'd be very, a 1 minute, or maybe 2 at most. It takes so long to say my name and address.
I will let you negotiate that with the town moderators, since
All
it's
right.
not currently
Okay,
on the timing.
okay.
Are there any other articles that anybody feels that they want to take a position on, that we've taken a position on, that anybody wants to speak to, that we haven't assigned? So really, we're just waiting on one school committee question and several planning board.
Well, even though we probably don't want to take a position now, I think we should, I think somebody should be preparing a position for us if we anticipated an amendment to the Jarrell land. Well, we just ought to get our thoughts together. We can talk about it, take a position at town meeting, but I don't think it's smart to try to craft
Right, on the fly.
on the fly.
I agree. I also would like our assistant town manager to do whatever she can to get clarity on a motion, either incorporated or delivered at town meeting, if that.
You know, if we don't get clarity,
Yeah.
I'd like whatever language to give us the wiggle room to continue negotiations.
Right.
But I think procuring a
Well,
property.
like Chris said at the end of our discussion on the article, I mean, if the amendment is there and passes, we still have to negotiate a purchase and sale agreement. And if it was the case, just making Kate goes to votes and they negotiate, and he says, I'm sorry, we're not gonna do this, if that's in there, then I think we would still be able to conclude then that we're gonna go down path A.
Right.
Yeah, you want that flexibility.
Right, exactly.
If the deal doesn't work, you still want to buy the land.
So I don't think putting the word in there compromises
Our ability to negotiate.
to do what we think is right, and still act faithfully. So I think it would be smart if we had some language put together, having a point of view about an amendment.
Okay.
Maybe Kate could help.
Well, I'm on the hot seat. I'm on the seat to speak to the article as now,
Well, then you just got another job.
so I will add another piece.
But I'm happy to help if you.
Oh, believe me, I will share.
So, you know, in the presentation, depending on what Kate learns, the presentation that's currently planned is similar to what we heard tonight with it as a development for recreational purposes.
Yeah, I think that
So we
making
have
it a less,
Make some amendment to, some changes or edits to the presentation to allow for, further discussions about whether we can include kind of more of the house on the property.
Okay.
I mean, it'd be disingenuous to have a property, that discussion at town meeting only include recreation when that's not the intent.
right, well, if we're gonna broaden the discussion, we need to have a image that would reflect that. Yeah. Okay. And now we get to discuss scheduling a public forum on JGOG pond issues, which is only more important, I think, now.
I would like the board felt strongly about this. Public Works, I think, is a little bit ambivalent. They're willing to share any information the public might be interested in, but weren't, exactly sure how to present it. So they had a few ideas. But I think what the board would like to see is a public forum. Is it fair to say a public forum in? I don't know where we would host it at Harvey Wheeler. This room. I'm thinking of May after the long range. We were thinking of the week. The comprehensive long range planning committee was, and then they took that date. So I'm thinking the following week,
Yeah,
perhaps
early May.
first week of May, maybe the first Wednesday in May, and present a little basic understanding of how our water system works, how Nagog Pond the water filtration plant is important to our planning, has been in our planning for 20 years, and sort of where we stand, and then provide plenty of opportunity for the public to ask questions of things that they have in their mind. Try to answer as many questions in advance, but there'll be some questions that people will be wondering about that we might not anticipate.
Right, and we will have more information at our under our belts at that point than we even do now. This is the start of Acton's town meeting tonight.
Tonight, yes.
And unfortunately, due to the religious concerns over Holy Thursday, the special permit was not voted on as scheduled and planned on last Thursday in Acton. And just because I have to say it out loud, this is something that our own attorney had pointed out to the Acton Select Board when they scheduled Maundy Thursday as the night for their vote. And he brought that up back in February. And this was discussed in public forum, empty public forum, last Thursday. So it is frustrating.
So I'd like to be part of the planning on the NAHA meeting, you know, how we do our public forum and how we present and what we're presenting, so.
Okay, so I thought I'd draft an agenda for the meeting, talk with Rich about it tomorrow. I'm thinking Wednesday, May 2nd is the first Wednesday, so tentatively we'll see what room is available. Harvey Wheeler would be okay, because I don't think the hearing room here will be quite ready. It's getting closer. And then, so I'll circulate that as a draft, Alice.
Okay. So I believe we are finally at public comment. Are there any? Okey-doke. We will move on to committee liaison reports.
I was not able to go to the Lifeline meeting, I know you went.
We did. It was an interesting discussion. I'm going to circulate. There's a progress report that the Light Board has put together on actions that they've taken since Article 51 passed. So I'll circulate that among our boards so you can see what they've been up to. And they will be posting that in this form or some other, maybe it's already up there on the Light Board's website, so that folks can take a look at what progress has been made to helping us reach our energy goals from Article 51. I have to go back and look at my notes for what I've missed in the last. Steve can see.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of attending the Affordable Housing Funding Committee meeting last week. They've been doing a lot of homework on their about 4 or 5 options for revenue generation. Some based on some fees at closing of real estate transactions. Some are based on permitting, more to share the ideas. I think I recommended to them to speak with the select board first, to schedule time with us to talk about like what their strategy or possible approaches are, and then also spend some time with the FinCom to see if they had any guidance there as well. So it's coming along. They're doing a great job.
I know there's been talk about an update. That I think that Todd had expressed interest.
Mhm.
He brought that up at a couple of meetings. Is that still a?
I think the first step should be to come report it, and then maybe do a public meeting, a public hearing of some type to share kind of their thoughts about it.
Great.
I want to commend Kate and the Recreation Department for an unbelievably fun egg hunt. The only thing I was missing was a kid to be with me. There must have been 1,000 people there. They flooded the fields. It was controlled chaos. To watch the 2 and under group go and get eggs was just hilarious. The kids were like, the eggs were the side story. They had free run without parents' interference, running into each other. They had a petting zoo, they had games at the high school. It was a really great event, and it made me feel great to be in this little town.
I couldn't second that enough. I was there and invited to sit on the Easter Bunny's lap, which I declined. I still want to know who it was. And the potbelly pig.
Oh, was it?
Was
right, amazing, right?
Yeah. Absolutely, and I hope that there was some great photographs taken, because that was a really
It was a good
fun
one.
thing, and it didn't matter that it was crummy at all.
Kids didn't know. And they were dressed in their Easter bonnets. It was really good. So hats off to the
Well, I did the walkthrough with the Housing and Recreation Department folks and learned a lot more about the house on Drill Land. And I also did attend the Magog special permit hearing, even though it was it was no longer intended to be a voting session. So I think I've reported enough on those. Any further? Well, and what about miscellaneous correspondence? Okay, let's keep going on to committee nominations.
Nominate Joseph Levine of 29 Temple Road to the Pollinator Health Advisory Committee.
Awesome. Thank you. And what about appointments?
I move to appoint Don McCullough of 178 Virginia Road and Jennifer Johnson of 85 Eden Drive to the Youth Coordinator Advisory Board for terms to expire May 31st, 2021.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. And I also move to reappoint James Dahoney of 279 Hayward Mill Road to the Trustees of Town Donations for a term to expire May 31st, 2021.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?